Hi, I'm John Nickus, filling in for publisher Keith Martin, and we're going to be taking a look at a particular vehicle which is having its moment in the sun here on today's SCM Market Moment with Philip Richter of Turtle Garage. Philip, how are you?
I'm good, John. How are you?
Good. So I was on Bring a Trailer the other day and was noticing for the first time, at least in a long time in my memory, that R129 Mercedes SLs are actually doing something in the market. Is that true, or are they still free?
They woke up. Boy, have they woke up. It's incredible what's happened. I don't know which one you were looking at, but the silver V12 600 sold just a couple days ago for, I think, around $64,500, which is, a lot of money for that car with miles. I think that example had about 38,000 miles on it, which is still obviously not a lot of miles, but it's not a spring chicken either.
Well, so Philip, are these desirable collectible cars now, rather than old
you're
cars?
talking to the guy who, of course they are. I own one. I've owned 3 of them in my life. I drove one 50,000 miles. I had a 1995 SL 500 R129. I mean, this is the best looking, timeless, beautiful Bruno Sacco design, pre-Chrysler merger. They're built like nothing else. They're massive. And there's a lot of, the menu's awesome, right? You could get them in a 6-cylinder. They actually made them in a 5-speed 6-cylinder for a while in the early 90s. That's a great car. You get it in the M119 V8, great car. And then the Holy Grail is, the 600, which is the V12. I mean, these cars were all over, 90, 100 grand when they were new. The V12s were like 130. So they're the top of the food chain of Mercedes of that era, and they're built.
You touch upon that issue, and it's actually interesting that there were 2 different 6-cylinder engines, right? There's an inline 6 and a V6. There's a V8, and then the 12-cylinder. So you really have the entire gamut of engine packages. What is the most desirable from either an ownership standpoint or a collectability standpoint?
I'd say collectability, the V12, only because it's a 12. And there's something about a V12 that gives that car a turbine-like feel. The problem with the 12, and I own a 12, I actually own a 2001 R129 600 V12 with 187 delivery miles on it. And the problem with the V12 is it's heavy. So I actually think the V8 is the sweet spot car. If I did get the 6-cylinder, I'd want the 5-speed, just because who has an R129 5-speed? And the 300 SL motor, that iteration, it goes.
Well,
it's
so the 5-speed is only available on the 6-cylinders, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they imported, a tiny number of them to the U.S., but there are U.S. spec cars that are 300 SLs. The SL 320 was after 1995, and that was not available in a 5-speed, I don't believe.
So the one thing I think about this Bruno Sacco design is it's timeless in that it's almost looks like it's carved out of a single ingot of metal. Does it drive that way, or is it actually more dynamically entertaining?
It's not, it's not a lively, thrilling sports car. It's more of a combination of a boulevard cruiser of the prior generation car, and it has a little bit of the 207, the next generation car, being more sporty. It's sort of in between those 2 cars, which is logical because it is from a time standpoint in between. But it's a great car to drive. I mean, when you put the top down in that car, it's an amazing envelope, because if you're driving on the highway at 90 miles an hour, which it just cruises at 90, you get put the windows up and the rear deflector up, and you can literally have a perfect conversation going 100 miles an hour.
Does it have any car guy credibility, or do you always look like you're a third Beverly Hills wife on the way to a Botox injection?
No, I don't think this car has that symbolism at all. No, it's a real car. I mean, I can't say enough good about them because I think it's one of those designs that just was perfect out of the box. The interior is stunning. The exterior it's got interesting angularity, but it also has swooping curves to it. It looks great with the hard top on. It looks great with the top down. It looks great with the soft top up. They also, even the very later models had a special hardtop option, which I think was like $20,000 or $30,000 option.
Is that the glass one?
The pano roof, and that gives the car a whole different look altogether again.
I agree. These are really desirable cars, and you talked about from a collectability standpoint, the 600 kind of being at the top of the food chain. But what about the special models? Like, what about the AMGs? What about the Mille Miglia edition or the Silver Arrow editions out there?
Yeah, I mean, there was a Silver Arrow that sold on Bring a Trailer. I think it was a 0-mile car. It was a 600, which I think they only, Dean Lumbach would know, but they only imported to the U.S. a handful, I think, of the 600 Silver Arrows. But yeah, all of those I think are special cars to own for sure. Probably in order, an SL 73 if it was real.
Right.
Wow, like that's the top of the food chain. But probably the Silver Arrow edition would be the highest value special edition of the R129. The problem with that car is the interior is just, to me, the seat colors are just very odd. It's kind of like a black and white kind of seat thing going on. It's not very pretty.
Okay.
I think they look stunning in silver, and they look stunning in black. There are a couple weird red colors they had over the years, but this is a car that, when it has staggered rims on it, like factory AMG, the monoblocks that they put on the very last year of the 600s, they're just it's a great car. It evokes a sense of strength and rigidity with having a lot of style.
So, Philip, does this really uphold the tradition started with the 300 SL and kind of continuing on through, the Pagodas and the 450s, the 560s? This is a real SL and something you can be proud to drive and own?
I believe so, 100%. I mean, it's not, SL in German is Sportlicht, which is, sport light car, sporty. This is not a light, sporty car. This is a real heavy. I mean, if you're going to be in a really serious accident in an automobile, this is a car you want to be in.
Right.
I mean, this is a safe, even by today's standards, this is a safe car. It was out of the gate in 1990. It had dual airbags, all these, the rollover bar, which senses instability of the car and it'll pop up behind your head. I mean,
it has an adaptive damping suspension, right?
Yeah, unbelievable what it had in its time, and I think it's a car whose time has come. I'm surprised it took this long for the market to recognize this car, but watching and looking at what's going on online, they're moving up, no question. The 600s seem to be moving more than the other cars, which makes sense. I mean, the 600 was like a $40,000 option to have the 12. When you look at the window stickers of these cars, the problem with the 600s are most of these cars were leased, and they weren't very good to own long term from an ongoing maintenance perspective. If you were going to have to pay to maintain these cars, so people shied away from holding them after the lease expired. So a lot of them fell into hands that didn't maintain them properly. So again, it's the same old story, like how many investment grade 600s are out there. And that's probably why this one on Bring a Trailer did so well, because it was, medium miles, but it looked like it was in very good shape and it was maintained by an enthusiast.
Well, what other concerns are out there for these cars? Is it really just maintenance and electricals?
The soft top hydraulics need to be replaced. That's a big job unless you know the right people to do it. I mean, it's probably a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 job by a Mercedes technician. So that's out there. Other than that, like I had as I said, a 1995 SL 500 R129, and I drove it like it was my regular car for like 4 years, and I drove it and put 50,000 miles on it. Nothing ever broke on it. Nothing ever went wrong. I changed the oil. I changed the tires. I think it had brakes at one point because it's a big, heavy car, right?
Right.
But nothing catastrophic.
So this is definitely a buy from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a buy. I think maybe, an SL 600 for 64,000 with 38,000 miles is not a buy, but 500, for 25,000 bucks all day long. That was a $90,000 car new, and not only did it have the price of $90,000, it was built like a $90,000 car. I mean, I say this often, but the pyramids of Egypt are going to crumble before a lot of these R129s do, right? Like these things are built like no other car in the world. That used to be Mercedes' tagline, right? Like engineered like no other car in the world. These are built like no other car in the world.
Well, and these really are, I think, an exceptional example of what Mercedes could do before they started cutting corners, I think, when the Daimler Chrysler merger occurred.
That is a great point. This was a show. Like let's look at the driver's seat of the R129, okay? Don't quote me, but I'm trying to remember the stat on this. I believe there are over 25 patents for the seat alone, right? So you've got the integrated the integrated seat belt, which is in the seat. Then you have, all these, the mechanisms and the rollover situation that to pull this seat forward on an R129 to access the back shelf, you need to be a weightlifter.
Well, I think the thing that's amazing is you've talked about it twice, is that automatic roll bar, that the minute the car senses any instability, this roll bar pops up from behind the front seats, is a technological marvel because, I'm a British car guy. We can't even get the parts that were installed at the factory that are supposed to stay together to actually be there when you need them. So, I mean, this is really kind of state of the art.
Yeah, it's sort of still state of the art. Like how many convertibles out there have a pop-up roll bar that goes up in like 1/100 of a millisecond behind your head if the car senses an impending rollover? None that I know of.
Is it worth the extra spend to get the 600?
I don't think so. I don't think so because okay, you get, I think you go to 382 horsepower from 310 or 305 in the 119, but you also put a ton of weight in the car, right? So the 129 600 is a very heavy car, and there is something cool about a V12. I mean, if you want to go down the rabbit hole of Enzo Ferrari, admiring the great Packard V12s of the 30s and then deciding that was going to be the configuration that he would put in his race cars. And, the difference between a Mercedes V12 and all these other V12s is that a Mercedes V12 on a relative basis needs no maintenance. I mean, people can talk all they want about how complicated these engines are and how expensive they are to service, and there's 2 spark plugs per cylinder. You have 24 spark plugs in this thing. It's nothing compared to a normal V12 from let's say, an Italian manufacturer. These things just run.
I mean, no question. Look, if we were comparing this between Italian V12s or even the Jaguar V12, if I was, having to get into a car and get to the hospital for something, I definitely want it to be built by Germans. And the amazing thing about this car is stylistically, that Bruno Sacco styling has aged very, very well. It doesn't look as aged as the generation of SL that came before it, and even the 190 SL, which benefits greatly from its similarity to the 300, the original 300. This kind of stands on its own. It's a very good looking car.
It doesn't look like anything before or since, but it does harken back to all the SLs before it. And I don't know how he did that, but he did. I think it, and even the like subtle gills on the grill, on the side behind the front tire, they look right. They kind of call back to that era. then you throw the V12 emblem above it if you have the V12, and it's cool. I do know that you were talking about maintenance issues. The wiring harness for these cars is an issue, and that they have to be replaced over time. They were made of biodegradable material, and they fail. But everybody, on BAT makes such a ruckus over that, and you just replace it and move on. It's not that big a deal. It's a couple $1,000 and you move on.
And that's all it is. It's not like the hydraulic mechanism for the top. It's not going to cost more than your credit card can handle.
To me, the issues are the hydraulics of the soft top can be an issue in some cars, and then there's the engine harnesses. And I think that's true for the M119 and for the 120, the V12.
Philip, what's more important to you, records or mileage or condition? I mean, what are the things that you're going to want to look for?
The most important thing for me in looking at a car like this is I want to know who owned it. It can't have 5 owners. It can't have been handed around like a joint at a dead show, right? Like it needs to have one owner who bought it new, who had the money at the time to buy a $90,000 Mercedes-Benz and not whine about it. Then they kept it, they maintained it. So if it has, 50, 60, 70,000 miles, I mean, remember what this is. This is a Mercedes-Benz from a different era when they were built to a standard, not to the accountant's wishes of cutting costs, right? So if it's one owner, there's a full book of records. I wouldn't mind the car having some miles. I side with Keith, with our publisher on this. Cars with ultra low miles, cars are meant to be driven. They die from that. And I'm kind of talking out both sides of my mouth because I have a 129 with no miles on it. But I justify that because I've driven 129s a lot of miles, and I came across this car at a moment in time when it was very cheap for what it was. And also, it gets serviced annually by the dealership. It goes in, they change the oil, they run it, they do what they do, and it's marked in the service record on the vehicle, the VMI, that it was serviced. So I think ownership, records, then mileage. If you're a fanatic, maybe you compromise a little bit on ownership and go for lower mileage. But these are cars that just run, particularly the V8. The V8 is the M119 motor is bulletproof. Yeah, so I have a 1994 E500 that has the same motor, right? And it has 91,000 miles on it. I'm the second owner. My friend's dad bought it new. I bought it from him when it was like 4 years old. And they took off the valve cover and looked at the lifters and everything, and it was brand new. They were like, they couldn't believe, there's no wear. Everything was clean as could be. I have a photograph of it. It's stunning. That's what these were built like.
Well,
yeah. And I'm getting a little bit more in the weeds. In 1998, after the Chrysler merger, they switched the motor from the 119 to from a 4-valve per cylinder to a 3-valve per cylinder. That motor's no good.
Okay.
So, you don't want to own the later V8s. The 12 is the same through the whole production run pretty much. But you want to own that M119 motor, which I think they stopped putting in the 129 in 1998.
Philip, if I want to shift for myself, I'm restricted to the 6-cylinder cars. Is there much difference between the V6s and the inline 6s from a performance or ownership standpoint?
I think the V is the more modern motor, and that's probably the better motor. I'm not sure. I'd have to double check, but I think the 5-speed was only offered in the inline 6. So there's a trade-off there. But the inline 6 was a great motor too. So I don't think, Mercedes engines of that era, whether it was a 4-cylinder and a 190E, or it was a diesel, or whether it was a straight 6, a V6, a V8, they were all great. No one complains about those. So I would say, if you want the manual, go for the manual with the straight 6.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for your time. Again,
Thank you.
It's been SCM's Buy, Sell, Hold market moment. We've been talking R129 Mercedes-Benzes with Philip Richter from Turtle Garage. Philip, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, John.